Hey everyone, and welcome to our series recap. What we're doing here, so at One Church, we'll focus on a particular topic for a length of time, and we decided to do a bit of a recap, so have a conversation, unpack what did we speak about, cover some of the ground, and summarize it here for you. And last time we looked at
Giving.
Good. It's not that I forgot in the moment. But today we're recapping our fasting series. This is all part of our Land in the Impossible campaign, the word that we're using for that. All about seeing God do the impossible things in our lives. And there are some ingredients when it comes to like seeing the miraculous and God landing the impossible. There's things that are often present when that happens. And Jesus says when we pray, when we give, and when we fast, and he encourages us to do those things and teaches us how to do them. So that's what we've been unpacking as a church. So we're going to recap the series today. And just to start, so talking about giving and fasting, something that really helped me understand this is seeing them as what you could call a means of grace. Mm-hmm. So if we give, if we pray, and if we fast, what that doesn't do, and what we don't believe, is that somehow forces God's hand right into, hey, you fasted for so long, so well done. I'm now going to move in your life. I'm going to answer your prayers. Or, goodness me, Mark, you've given so much. You're so generous. Therefore, I'm going to do some good stuff for you. So it's not, we don't believe that. What we do believe, however, is that the grace, so if God ever answers a prayer or breaks through in our lives, all of that is his grace at work in our lives. But he gives us in his goodness what we call a means of grace, a means by which we can access those things. Mm-hmm. So praying is a means of grace. Giving, when we're generous, that's our means of grace where we can unlock provision and generosity in our lives, and fasting is the same. So good. Yeah, that's really helped me almost move away from it's not rules, regulations, legalism. This is all grace. So Mike, I wonder if you could kick us off, like talk about some of the message that you brought and help us understand fasting.
Yeah, sure. So just to build on what you've just said there, Nath, which I thought was excellent, by the way. I talked about how anything in my hands has limited potential. You know, you could put a paintbrush in my hand, and I'm not a great artist. There's very limited potential with a paintbrush. So you could do the same with the ingredients for a meal. Very limited potential in my hands. Conversely, anything I put into God's hands has unlimited potential. God is the God of the impossible. And for me, giving, fasting, and praying are like the transfer mechanisms where things leave my hands and land in his hands, and then he can do anything. It's a means of grace. It's a means of putting things into his hands. And so for fasting, I really felt
DIY though, right?
I'm okay at DIY.
You did your whole bathroom.
I'll keep hold of that. I'll keep hold of that one.
Yeah. I managed to stop a leak in my bathroom. I got the silicone gun and just nuked the tap. So now it's like, it looks like a volcano of silicon with a little tap coming out, but it doesn't leak.
If it works.
That's right.
Yeah, so for the idea of fasting, fasting is something Jesus said when you fast, which is already interesting to me. He didn't say if you fast, like it's an optional thing for Christians, but when you fast. So for Jesus, it was a really instrumental part of our lives as Christians to disconnect from the world and connect to him. And we get this from this idea from the book of Matthew chapter 17, where the disciples are trying to heal a young man who's suffering with epileptic fits. These fits are very severe, and he finds himself out of control, being thrown into the fire. And so the father, as any father would, asks the disciples, "Can you heal my son?" And the disciples attempt to heal the son, but get nowhere. They struggle. And so they take him to Jesus. And they say, we haven't been able to heal this young boy. Can you heal him? Jesus' response is very simple. He says, you corrupt generation. Sounds quite harsh. You're corrupt. And secondly, he says, you're faithless. This is the problem that they're facing. You're corrupt and faithless. In other words, you're too connected to the world and not enough connected to God. And that's why you're struggling here to land the impossible. And Jesus gives the disciples two solutions. He says this kind or this illness or this spirit only comes out by prayer and fasting. Fasting disconnects us from the world. It fixes that issue of being too connected to the world. Fasting disconnects us to the world. Praying connects us to God. It solves the second problem of faithlessness. So in the discipline of fasting and praying, that's really what we're doing. We're disconnecting from the grip of the world, the hold of the world, the mindsets of the world, the influence of the world on us that perhaps limits our faith. And by praying in that space, we're then increasing our intimacy with God, and we get our faith grows in that environment. And then we find we're able to land more impossibles as we do. So fasting is definitely directly linked to landing the impossible.
Really good. Now, Ames, you brought a bit of a different perspective on fasting. And so Mike's there talking about seeing the impossible landed. I'll ask it in this way. So if I fast, then is it inevitable that things that you would describe as impossible would happen? Yes.
Yeah, I wish the answer was yes. And I think we all wish the answer was yes. You fast once, or you fast for a period of time, guaranteed to get the answer, or guaranteed to get the breakthrough that you want. But sometimes we know that is not the case. And so my question was around what happens when it takes a really long time to land the impossible. What if you've been giving, you've been fasting, but still there is no impossible that's being landed in your life? What happens then? And I think that's one of the big barriers to a lot of people becoming Christians, or for people actually losing faith. It's when God doesn't answer a prayer that seems to be a good prayer or a right prayer, or when something bad happens to good people. It becomes this barrier. And I think the challenge with that is when it's taken a long time. So if we're still praying or still believing or still fasting and nothing's happening, it can cause us to grow weary in our faith and threaten to lead us to giving up. But there's an amazing verse in the Bible that talks into that feeling of, if you're weary and if you're still waiting, what to do. So in Hebrews 12, it says, "Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart." So consider Jesus, who endured such opposition, so that you won't grow weary and lose heart. So when we remember how much Jesus went through for us, it means that we don't lose heart. When we imagine or consider or pick apart, think about, magnify, meditate on his suffering at the cross, or that determination that he had, or when he was in Gethsemane and chose not my will but yours, when we consider that, then we don't grow weary and lose heart. And fasting, I think, is a way that we can consider his endurance. So consider him who endured. Fasting is one of the ways that we can do that, because C.S. Lewis calls it practice suffering. So in his book, The Problem of Pain, which again is a great book, I think, within that concept of when stuff's not going as you think it should, or when you come across suffering and pain in the world. But he talks about it being practice suffering, a way that you can engage with, wrestle with, identify with the suffering of Jesus. So in a small way, you deny your body something in the moment that it thinks it needs, and you're identifying with the suffering of Jesus and saying, okay, Jesus, this is really hard for me, but if I'm feeling this and you endured what you did, then it develops in us perseverance. And I think it's that perseverance and that endurance then that keeps us hopeful, that keeps us believing, keeps us going, even when it's taking a long time to land the impossible.
Really good. And for me, this is just highlighting so many of the benefits of fasting. So as we've said, it detaches us from the world. It produces perseverance in us. Now, one of the questions that actually came up in this series was, is there a difference, and I'll throw this ball to you in a second, Mike, is there a difference between fasting food and just abstinence in general? So can I, for example, can I fast social media, or can I fast Netflix? And is there a distinction to be made between fasting food and what I'm digesting versus what I'm doing or watching?
Yeah, sure. Well, in the Bible, fasting is about food.
Okay.
It's very clear that fasting is a foregoing of a meal, or more than one meal, for a period of time, to dedicate that time to identifying with Christ, to seeking God, to consecration, to disconnect from the world, to connect to God and receive what God has for you in that place. And that's very much what fasting is. And abstinence is foregoing other things that aren't food for the same purposes. So you might abstain from watching TV or social media or something that is perhaps a hobby for you, to be able to create space and make room for spiritual disciplines, for perhaps a period of prayer or a period of pressing into God. And that's abstinence. Both are ideas in the Bible. Both are equally good. It's not that fasting is better than abstinence or abstinence better than fasting. They're just different ways of decluttering, of foregoing, of suffering, of letting go of some things to prioritize the presence of God.
Very good. And there's something about, so you're right, abstinence is very valuable and impactful. Fasting food, very impactful and powerful. There's something that happens, however, when we get hungry, and it just clicks us into a different gear, a different way of thinking, a different, dare I say, level of desperation. Where and I find this when I'm hungry, because I love food, as do most humans, but I enjoy my food, I enjoy my meals. So much of our days are built around breakfast, dinner / lunch, whatever we call it, based on where you are in the country, tea, evening meal, dinner time. It's and thinking about preparing for, eating, cleaning up after. So when you don't do that, suddenly, goodness me, I've got loads of time that's been created to hunger after God, to pray. And every time you get that little groan in your stomach, that little like, wouldn't it be great if I'm like, this is terrible for me, but every time I do fast, suddenly I'm just mindful of all the culinary delights that I'd like to like get into. Like it's in my brain, and my imagination goes wild. Like, what if I could combine this with this for breakfast? And anyway,
you come up with some good concoctions. You should maybe write them down when you're fasting.
How to break your
Nathan's
fast.
dream journal.
Yeah, my dream
and
journal.
you could come up with these culinary delights that could be
tricky,
like
but it's also a bit weird.
burger, pizza,
yeah,
donut.
So at the end of fasting Feb, I broke the fast with like a fry up, but I made my own and just went. It looked like a challenge, so I had like 4 sausages, 3 eggs, hash browns, beans. I'm quite hungry now, in case you can't tell. But there's something about it, and every time that those hunger pangs come, it's like, Lord, I'm hungering after you.
Right.
And so really, it's like, I'm sure we'd all agree, it's a great thing to do. Yes, when we have united as a church in fasting Feb, but throughout the year to consider how we might fast in different times. And I think if we can finish with this idea, if someone wants to start fasting, they don't really know where to begin, they've never really engaged with it, where do we start? What does that even look like?
Yeah. So I would say, firstly, you have to identify why you want to fast. What is it that you're praying for? What is it you're seeking God for? Or what is it that you feel is perhaps become a distraction that you need to forego to be able to create room for God? What's your reasoning? What's your motivation? When you've got that really clear, then you might want to move on to sort of the next part of the process, which is to choose what you are going to fast or abstain from. For what period of time. So you might decide, if you're new to this, I am going to give you an example here. I'm going to fast my breakfast. And instead of eating breakfast on that Monday morning, I'm going to create that little space there to just pray before I go to work. And then I won't eat until after 12 o'clock, for example. And practice it. Try it. And see how you get on with that. Review that. Try different things. Be open to variety in that. And what I've found over my Christian life is that I've tried lots of different types of fast, lots of different types of abstinence. And really I'm trying to be led by the Spirit each time as to what I think at that time, in that season, would be a good fast for me.
Yeah, very good. Anything to say on that, Aim? Any closing comments as well?
I think you're right. Thinking really, so first of all, like, you're right, the aim of the fast and then the practicalities around it. So I try to not fast when, if I try to plan it in my diary. So if I know that I'm not going out for a meal that day that I've already got booked in, or I try and do it on a day where I'm not going to go to the gym, because I know that makes it even harder. So just think really practically, are you on medication? Are you at a time in your life where it's a healthy thing to do as well? It's being mindful of all of those things. Right. But I think for me, the challenge that I'm taking away from this series is like you said, it's when you fast. So what does that, when is my when? So moving forward, when is my when? So even if I don't have a specific area that I'm really wanting breakthrough in, and there'll always be something I know, but if it's just, okay, God, I'm going to do this because you say I should. When is my when? When am I going to do that? What does that look like for me moving forward? So I know it's something that I want to continue into this year now to make it part of my normal discipleship, I guess.
Sure. Very good. And I'll finish with this then, because it's so important, the idea of fasting. And I think you just only need to look at our culture and our society and what we kind of glorify, what we glamorize. And food is just so, it's almost idolized. Here's a challenge for all of us. On your commute home, like, see how many times you'll see massive images of food. Like, it's almost like these little shrines or statues at bus stops, this wonderful burger or like chips.
Yeah, and you're really hungry. Maybe just stop.
I am. No, I am.
Stop.
But in our last recap, we spoke about Romans 12, where it says, don't conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And fasting is this countercultural means of going, okay, I am putting down what is important, eating, but what is often like, we often we live for, sometimes we live around. Saying, no, Jesus, you take that number one spot in my life. It's that cultivating perseverance in us and allowing God to do some really great things in our lives. So we encourage you, catch up on the sermons if you did miss them. Some links to those will be in the show notes. Thank you for joining us for this series recap. Catch the next one. Be blessed. Goodbye.